Hello and welcome to a new Postcard Cities of Tomorrow POCACITO webinar. It's our first one for 2018 and I'm very happy to be presenting here today. My name is Max Grünig. For those of you who haven't had the pleasure to meet me yet, I work with the Ecologic Institute and we run the Postcard Cities of Tomorrow network of people in cities active on sustainability in the United States and in Europe. And today here I'm very pleased to have two colleagues from Baltimore here with us presenting the Baltimore Green Network to the POCACITO community. And we have Kate Edwards, the Baltimore Green Network Program Manager, working for the Baltimore Office of Sustainability, and also her colleague, Amy Gilder-Busatti. She's responsible for overseeing the city's Green Network plan and is a landscape architect, also with the Baltimore Office of Sustainability. So just a little bit of housekeeping. As always, you're muted by default, so you can cough and sneeze now. It won't affect us at all. But of course, after the proper presentation by Kate and Amy, we will have the opportunity to ask questions and engage in a conversation. And for that, you have various options for doing so. You can use the chat function, you can use the questions function, or you can raise your hand. And please use any of these. I will try to track them. And if you are able to ask, if you have a microphone and audio, then I'll unmute you and you can ask the questions yourself. If you indicate that you're in a setting where this doesn't work for whatever reason, then just let me know and I'll be happy to read out your questions and capture the essence of what you wanted to ask. Of course, it's more interactive if you speak for yourself. And then, of course, if you miss out on anything, if you want to rewatch the webinar, it's being recorded. It'll be available on our YouTube channel and on our website. And also, of course, you can engage with questions later on after the end of the webinar, should we not have enough time to answer all of your questions. But that's enough from me now. I want to hand over to Kate and Amy, and thank you again very much for joining us here today. And I'll be quiet now and let you present the Baltimore Green Network. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, do you have our slides up? Let's see. There you go. Okay, there we go. Hi, welcome to today's webinar about the Baltimore Green Network, a plan for a green and connected city. I'm Amy Gilder-Busatti, Baltimore Green Network Plan Manager, and I'm joined today by Kate Edwards, Baltimore Green Network Program Manager. Our agenda for the webinar is to spend about 30 to 40 minutes providing an overview of the plan and then spending the remaining time for questions and comments. The presentation is intended to provide an overview of the plan. There's much more detail in the plan itself that we won't have time to cover today. But at the end of the presentation, we'll share a link to our website where you can view the plan in its entirety. So I'll begin by addressing some of the key factors that have led us to develop the Baltimore Green Network and its overall objectives. And then I'll review how our 2-year planning process and the resulting citywide vision plan have taken shape. Kate will address how we've worked with partners and specific neighborhood groups to conduct design charrettes and identify pilot projects for short-term implementation, and also recommendations that we've developed to move the plan forward. First, I'd like to provide a little bit of background about Baltimore and our open space history. Baltimore is a port city, and the growth of the city began around the harbor. That's kind of, the area kind of here in the central part of the city, and kind of expanded from there. The majority of our housing stock is made up of 2- and 3-story brick row houses, and as residential patterns in our city began to become more suburban as the city grew out and expanded, single-family homes were built in the northern parts of the city, making those areas less densely developed than neighborhoods built earlier in Baltimore's history. In the early 1900s, our city's leadership hired the renowned landscape architecture firm of the Olmsted Brothers Landscape Architects to create a master plan for our park system, and we still benefit from that planning today over 100 years later. This slide depicts the essential elements of Baltimore's existing green infrastructure network: our large major parks, our stream valleys that drain into the harbor, and also our forest canopy, which is mostly focused in the outer parts of the city that are less densely developed. You can see how this green infrastructure system is more prominent in the outer areas of the city and how it's less concentrated in the areas surrounding the urban core. Where's the mouse? There we go. Which were already densely developed at the time that the larger tracts of parkland were acquired and added to the city. With the exception of a few larger parks and cemeteries in the east, west, and southwest portions of the city, we have some smaller parks in those areas. Most of the open spaces in this area are pocket parks and neighborhood squares rather than large open spaces. Today we are a city of about 620,000 residents. At our peak in the 1950s, almost 1 million residents called Baltimore home. One of the great challenges facing Baltimore and other post-industrial American cities is the effects of population decline, which result in vacant and abandoned property. Each of the orange and yellow dots on the map, 30,000 dots in total, represent a vacant building or a vacant lot. And you can easily see that the vacants tend to be concentrated in those areas that lack abundant green space. These patterns relate to a history of harmful policies entrenched in racial inequity, such as mortgage redlining. In the 1920s and 30s, the U.S. government issued maps for many major U.S. cities that influenced in which neighborhoods people could get mortgages, and racial and ethnic factors were used in drawing those maps. These patterns are still evident today when we map factors such as vacancy, property values, life expectancy, healthy food access, and other topics. It's a daunting set of conditions, and we've thought about what actions can be taken to help reverse the patterns of decades-long disinvestment. We've also thought about, is there a case for focusing new resources in areas of need to help address the inequity? The Green Network Plan vision creates a framework to selectively transform vacant sites into community assets such as recreation areas, community gathering spaces, parks, forests, and urban gardens, along with opportunity sites for rehab and redevelopment. The vision also seeks to create connections between our green spaces and our neighborhoods to further enrich our social connectivity and strengthen the bonds among residents. So to help lead the creation of the vision plan element of our planning process, the Department of Planning hired a multidisciplinary consultant team. These are all local Baltimore firms. Biohabitats is the lead consultant on the team, and they are an environmental planning firm. They're joined by Flora Teeter, a landscape architecture firm, Living Design Lab, and they focus on urban design, Advanced Placemaking, focused on real estate and economic development, and Tool Design Group, pedestrian and bicycle planning firm. The success of the Green Network depends on whether it improves the lives of Baltimore residents. That's why the Department of Planning prioritized community engagement throughout the planning process to ensure that the voices of Baltimore residents are reflected in the plan. During all phases of the planning process, community input was gathered at a variety of small group neighborhood focus area meetings and through a series of larger public outreach events. So we had, as I mentioned, 4 citywide meetings. We had a number of charrettes with our 4 different focus areas, which Kate will talk more about later in the presentation. We also had a leadership team, advisory team, and subcommittees comprised of both residents and also stakeholders involved in greening projects and leadership of various organizations active in Baltimore related to these issues. We are currently in the comment period for our plan document, and we're doing a series of webinars. We did one here yesterday, and we're also tabling at various events in Baltimore to make people more aware of the plan in our comment period. And we also have an online survey or comment tool on a website called Civic Comment, where people can view the document and add their comments or ask questions. Our goals for our outreach are to incorporate equity and inclusion and make sure it's an inclusive process. We also want to make sure that we're identifying the needs of the communities and making sure that those are taken into account with the development of the plan. We're also making sure that we consider projects and plans that have already been identified, recognizing that this isn't the first time that people have thought about what they'd like to see in their neighborhoods or what types of green projects are being planned in the city, so making sure that we're taking those into account and building from them. We also want to make sure that in the neighborhoods where we're looking at doing pilot projects that we're using this planning process to build relationships that'll help with moving that process of implementation forward. So early in our planning process, we used feedback that we gathered at our first citywide meeting to develop goals and objectives for the plan. The goals and objectives include supporting economic growth and sustainable redevelopment, supporting the health and wellness of our communities, protecting and enhancing our ecological resources, providing safe access not just to green spaces, but also to community resources and economic hubs, and integrating opportunities to educate the public about the function and benefits of a green network. Our planning staff and consultants began our process by mapping our existing green network, including a variety of natural and human-made spaces, in order to understand how best to improve, expand, and strengthen these assets. The team also mapped historic patterns in the city's green network, using information that was available to identify historic natural features such as streams, shorelines, native soils, and floodplains. I mentioned streams just because Baltimore has a lot of streams that used to exist that are buried and are now part of our stormwater system, and so you can't necessarily see those patterns on the surface the way that you once could. In addition to our city's natural history, the Green Network vision takes into consideration our social history, including the patterns that relate to mortgage redlining. We also looked at data related to quality of life, and we mapped the feedback that we received through community meetings about barriers that people experience to accessing existing green spaces and where they would like to see new greening take place. In the final stages of creating the Green Network vision, the opportunities identified through the suitability analysis that I just went through, and also our community engagement, were analyzed through a process of prioritization with the goal of highlighting those opportunities with the greatest potential for beneficial impact in the areas of greatest need. The prioritization took several factors into account, including environmental needs, existing community assets, and gaps in ecological and transportation connectivity. All this analysis was taken into account in the development of the Green Network Vision Plan, which is our citywide framework that identifies opportunities for both connections and new green spaces. So the map here on the right is the vision plan for the Green Network. The Green Network Vision Plan is a strategy for improving and connecting a wide range of different types of spaces with the goals of improving quality of life, social equity, and connectivity. The strategy uses two broad categories of place-based elements within the city. So we have nodes, which are orange nodes are community nodes, green nodes are nature nodes, and these nodes are open green destinations and spaces for people and nature to meet, including, as I mentioned, nature nodes focused on wildlife habitat and open space, and community nodes focused around activity centers and neighborhood green spaces. We also have a variety of different types of corridors included in the plan, and these are linear spaces that provide safe, comfortable movement within and between nodes and neighborhoods for both humans and wildlife. So we have We have black and brown corridors that are our trail network loop that I'll talk about more in a bit. Parkway corridors, which are more focused on vehicular corridors with wide medians that are not necessarily seen as being primarily for people, but they move more traffic, but we still see those as important connections. And then community corridors, which are more focused on the pedestrian and bicycle scale and connections. Specific design concepts identified for the nodes and corridors will be developed in collaboration with the community as part of ongoing neighborhood planning activities, and some of these have already been completed with planning with the focus areas. As the city moves forward on implementation, all stakeholders will continue to refine and prioritize opportunities. This plan for the Green Network will be a living document and will continue to evolve. Then to talk a little bit more about nodes and the various types of nodes, the Green Network includes parks, recreation areas, forest patches, meadows, open spaces for gathering or play, or green spaces within new development areas. Nodes may have trees, benches, murals, flower gardens, sports fields, recreation centers, urban farms, playgrounds, stormwater treatment amenities, and water features. We have 3 different categories of nodes. So community nodes are the orange nodes, and these are open green spaces and amenities integrated into the established neighborhood fabric, focused in areas of greatest need. We have nature nodes, the green dots, which are natural spaces characterized by ecological function. And then we have anchor institution and existing open space nodes. So existing open space nodes being our existing large parks and recognizing their role within the Green Network, and also anchor institutions such as, where's our arrow? Where's the arrow? There it is. Okay. Such as our major universities and hospital campuses that have significant green space with them and their role within the Green Network. So as an example of one of the nodes that's been identified as a potential pilot project through our planning process, this is the Vincennes Park expansion node. It's located here in West Baltimore. This existing park is here in this green area on the map, and then you can see that the opportunity exists to expand it significantly up to 5.7 acres. And so this is the aerial photograph with the view looking south rather than north, the existing park, and then surrounded by vacant land and a few vacant buildings here. And so there are a total of 108 properties, 16 vacant buildings, and 87 vacant lots. And so this area outlined in yellow is 94% vacant and has the opportunity to create over 5 acres of open recreational space in an area that's a bit cut off from some of the larger parks that are nearby but not as accessible. Then discussing our corridors in our Green Network plan. To create a green network, nodes are connected to each other and to communities by corridors, linear spaces for humans and wildlife to travel safely and comfortably. Corridors include tree-lined streets, stream valleys, trails, blue alleys, bike lanes, and boulevards. They connect parks and open spaces to schools, retail districts, and other activity centers. There are 2 categories of corridors: community and parkway corridors, which provide safe and comfortable connections primarily for people, and nature corridors, which are the thicker green corridors, which provide a vital haven for wildlife and the health of our ecosystem. Enhancing, creating, and maintaining corridors is vital to the Green Network. We will discuss both types of corridor along with discussion of high priority focus areas in detail. So this is an example of one of the important corridor projects that we've identified. This is the Baltimore Greenway Trails Network, which is an organization called Rails to Trails. They're a national trail organization. They've been leading a planning process around this in Baltimore, and we wanted to incorporate this in our plan since we feel that it has significant opportunity to benefit the city overall. So the idea for this project is building on these green places within our city where we have existing trails and bicycle infrastructure. So these are a lot of our stream valleys have trail systems already, but we have gaps in this network. And so by connecting these gaps on this side of the city, this is a abandoned rail line, and there's a utility corridor here that has potential to make this connection on the east side of the city. And then also using, in the city's Olmsted plan, some of our major parks are connected with boulevards, and so looking at the opportunity to integrate bike and pedestrian paths within the medians of these boulevards to make these connections on the north side between these parks and trails. And so 12 miles of connections will help us create a 35-mile network.
So good afternoon, everyone. As Amy mentioned, my name is Kate Edwards, and my role with developing the Baltimore Green Network centered around the creation of the focus area plans, and now I've moved into the role of managing the implementation of the plan. The goal of the focus area plans is to apply the larger Green Network vision to specific neighborhoods by identifying pilot projects for both nodes and corridors in specific neighborhood context. We identified 4 focus areas. The central area includes the Druid Heights and Upton neighborhoods. The west area includes Harlem Park and Sandtown Winchester. Southwest includes Boyd Booth, Carrollton Ridge, and Shipley Hill. And east includes Broadway East and South Clifton Park neighborhoods. And I'll go into more details of each of these areas in my next slides, and also to the pilot projects we identified. Each of these areas present unique opportunities for strategic greening and neighborhood revitalization. These areas were identified through the suitability analysis described earlier. We focused on areas of the city that have experienced disinvestment and high concentrations of vacancy and have need for demolition of abandoned buildings. These conditions, while challenging, present opportunities for revitalization through enhanced greening. The focused area plans were developed with community members through a charrette design process. In each focus area, we hosted several community design sessions where residents and stakeholders identified local assets and opportunities for green network improvements, including vacant buildings that should be demolished, ideal sites for long-term and permanent green space, ideal sites for short-term green space that could be held for long-term redevelopment, and potential connections between green spaces and other community assets. During these community charrettes, 2 major themes emerged. First, people wanted to make sure that we had assurances that any new green spaces would be well maintained and not become new sources of blight, becoming overgrown or attracting dumping or crime. And second, residents emphasized the importance of integrating new development opportunities into the plan in addition to the greening elements. They wanted to see a balanced mixture of redevelopment, including both new construction and renovation of existing structures. Each of the focus area plans includes 3 main elements. First, we have Clean and Green, which is a temporary land holding strategy for vacant lots. The goal is for these lots to be maintained as an open lawn area to discourage trash dumping and provide flexible space for passive recreation. This is the first step in stabilizing vacant lots for adoption, future redevelopment, or permanent open green space like a neighborhood park. The key for success of these spaces is that they need a commitment for ongoing maintenance. Next, we have our pilot projects, which are intended to serve as longer-term green spaces. These include improving or expanding existing parks, creating new parks, creating new community-managed open spaces, and improving connections with new or extended corridors. These are some of the first new Green Network projects that we're already beginning to work on. And finally, we have what we're calling future opportunity sites. These are larger sites, especially in areas with high concentration of vacant lots and buildings that could be ideal for combining new developments with greening projects in the future. These will require extensive demolition, acquisition, and site assembly, and additional planning to determine the appropriate mix of development and greening. In the short term, these sites should be cleared and held as temporary green space for the community until enhanced greening proposal is created or a compatible development project is identified for the site. Now I'll give you an overview of each of the different focus areas. First, we have our central focus area. As I mentioned earlier, this includes Druid Heights and Upton neighborhoods. These neighborhoods are currently experiencing recent investments in new housing and various planning efforts. To complement this positive momentum, the plan for this area seeks to expand green space through strategic demolition, to create and maintain new park space, and to leverage the newly created green assets to attract private investment to the neighborhoods. The highlighted pilot project here is an area that we're currently calling Druid Square. Of course, we will work with the community to develop a more permanent name, but that's our temporary name. This area is envisioned as a 2.5-acre public square that will have open, active green space and a new playground. The site is currently a mixture of vacant lots and mostly abandoned buildings. 90% of the 88 properties on the site are currently vacant. The project will include demolition of the remaining buildings, and we've already identified state and city funds to complete the demolition and also to support renovation of the houses that will be facing this new public square. There's also a community development corporation, Druid Heights Community Development Corporation, that we're partnering with, that's already created several townhouses that are adjacent to this park, and they're working on a second phase of those townhouses, and will also be helping with the renovation or completing the renovation of the houses that I mentioned that face the square. The community has also been working to install a new playground at this location, and the goal is for this new park to support the recent development activity by providing an amenity for residents that could help to attract additional renovation and development to the surrounding residential blocks. Next, we have our West Focus area. The West Focus area encompasses the Harlem Park and Sandtown-Winchester neighborhoods. While these neighborhoods both have a number of strong blocks with few or no vacancies, as a whole, the area has lost many historic homes and businesses due to disinvestment and abandonment. Amidst the high levels of vacancy in the West area, there are large numbers of existing green spaces which create a unique character in the neighborhoods. Both neighborhoods contain a number of parks, many of which are in need of improved maintenance. This area is also close to major transit hubs and community spaces. The West Focus Area Plan seeks to build on this area's green strengths to help address its challenges and to begin rebuilding by strategically demolishing vacant buildings to support and connect the existing green spaces, and working to attract new resources and investment to these areas. I'd like to highlight 3 of the pilot projects in this area. First, we have the Harlem Park Interblock Parks. These parks this is the Harlem Park, the kind of southern portion of this area is Harlem Park, and the northern portion is Sandtown-Winchester. So Harlem Park has all of these small green parks, interblock parks we call them, throughout the neighborhood. These were areas that used to have alley houses and were demolished in the 60s and 70s and turned into small neighborhood parks with the idea that residents could utilize the spaces. However, over the decades, they've fallen into disrepair, and there's often been community complaints that the parks were not open. They didn't feel safe in the parks because they're kind of closed off to the neighborhood. So we're looking at a model that was created on the west side of the neighborhood with a nonprofit group called Parks and People Foundation that rehabbed several of these parks and created kind of more open spaces and made improvements. And so we'd like to mirror that on the east side of the neighborhood. We'd also like to look at strategic demolition to open up the parks visually and to create a connection through the neighborhood. And the next pilot project I want to talk about connects to this area, and it's the one highlighted here on the slide. So this is a highway on the southern portion of the neighborhood. It's often been called the highway to nowhere. It kind of cut through the neighborhoods decades ago. We'd like to try and reconnect this by creating a pedestrian path here. To the west, we have the West Baltimore MARC station, which is a commuter train station that connects to Washington, D.C. and other areas in the region. We want to connect all the way from there to downtown along the I-40, along the top of the I-40 highway. There's a large swath of green space along that area, and already the Department of Transportation has created this pedestrian path, but it's only a loop that goes about 5 blocks, and we'd like to extend that all the way downtown. And it would be ultimately at 1.5 miles once it's extended. And then finally, we have the Smithson Street Park. This would be a large area. It could be a 4-acre park in the southern portion of Sandtown, Winchester. And currently, it's 90% of these properties are vacant, and the project will require, again, significant demolition, but we've already identified the funding for the demolition through a state and city partnership and are looking to find other funding to create a park in that location. Next, we have our Southwest focus area. The Southwest focus area presents a unique opportunity to enhance the city's green network. Each of the 3 communities in this focus area is close to significant green, natural, or recreational area. And yet, it's largely cut off from these amenities by roads, industrial properties, and blight. Fulfilling the opportunities to connect these communities to their close yet inaccessible green spaces will greatly enhance the Baltimore Green Network. The Shipley Hill community is very close to Gwynns Falls Park and Trail, which run along its western border, but the park is rarely seen or used by residents for recreational purposes. In addition to a high number of vacant properties, Shipley Hill has 2 industrial pockets with a number of businesses that have become incompatible with the residential uses or are now vacant and blighted industrial properties, complicating the community's overall challenges. Similarly, in the Carrollton Ridge neighborhood, which is this portion, and what I was speaking about before was Shipley Hill up here, the Carrollton Ridge area in neighborhood abuts Carroll Park. This is to the south, with one entrance on South Monroe Street, a key opportunity for a better connection. The vacant buildings in Carrollton Ridge are scattered throughout the neighborhood, making it difficult to identify concentrated areas for demolition to create new green spaces. And then situated between the 2 neighborhoods is Boyd Booth, which is in this area. It's a relatively small neighborhood with few green spaces. Its only access to both Carroll Park and Gwynns Falls Park and Trail is through Shipley Hill and Carrollton Ridge. So the pilot project that we've highlighted here on this slide is actually in that Boyd Booth neighborhood that I was just speaking about. It's situated right here. It's a small park. It could be just under an acre, 1.7 acres to be exact. And this is an area where the community has already been working for the past decade to try and create a memorial park for Rachel Wilson, who was a firefighter who passed away in the line of duty in 2007. She was actually the first African-American woman firefighter to pass away in the line of duty. And she actually passed during a training session on this site, in a vacant building on this site. So it's really important to the community to memorialize her. And we've been working with the African-American Firefighters Historical Society to create this project and are having a lot of momentum. We will be putting some of our funding towards the completion of this project, and also there's some additional demolition that will occur that's already been funded as well. Again, 90% of this lot is vacant. And then we also are looking at ways to connect the neighborhoods through better trail connections into Carroll Park, and then also at least better view connections to Gwynns Falls Trail on this side. And finally, we have the East Focus area. The Broadway East and South Clifton Park neighborhoods make up this area, and these neighborhoods sit on either side of North Avenue, which is a major transit corridor, which is currently seeing significant investment through a project funded by a federal transportation grant. This focus area is characterized by a high concentration of vacant buildings and lots, but it's adjacent to areas experiencing significant redevelopment. Immediately to the south of Broadway East sits, and as to orient you on the map, this is Broadway East below North Avenue, and this is South Clifton Park. And so the area I'm talking about with redevelopment sits down here. So it's an area, 88-acre area known as Eager Park. This is a long-term mixed-use revitalization effort in East Baltimore. To date, there has been over $1 billion invested in this area, supporting 1,700 affordable and market-rate housing units, a new school and early childhood learning center, a 5-acre park, and large amounts of commercial and retail space. Eager Park's development, occurring next to Broadway East, will provide strong market support for the redevelopment plans in this neighborhood. However, it also increases the need for the community to have its own vision for how it wants to grow in the future. To begin to develop that vision, Southern Baptist Church, which is a local church in Broadway East, has worked with Eris St. Gross, a local planning and design firm, to lead up the process of creating a master plan in this area. This plan, we partnered with, since we were looking at the same area and we didn't want to have different planning efforts going on at the same time, we decided to partner with their planning effort. So we created our design, conducted our design charrettes at their meetings. And the plan that we've created here seeks to better connect the area with the new park to the south and with Clifton Park to the north through corridor enhancements, as well as strategically utilizing Project Core demolition funds to create new green spaces within the neighborhoods that can be paired with future redevelopment. So two of the projects I want to highlight are the Gay Street corridor greening. So right cutting through diagonally through this neighborhood is Gay Street. There's also already been several greening projects on this corridor due to the high vacancy in the area. So we have a new community park that we worked on with the community and created here. And then there's a small urban agriculture site here called the Flower Factory, which is a flower, I think it's pictured here. It's a commercial development of growth of flowers there. So we want to connect these spaces better and also use this connection to connect to south to this park and up to the north. And then I also wanted to highlight this area here. We've called this the Hoffman Street Greening Project. We have a new development over here called the Baltimore Food Hub, which it's a incubator space for new food businesses. And so we see that this space, which is highly vacant here, could become an area that maybe could have an urban agriculture site expanding where we have the flower factory or partnering with that space. Once we've done more demolition and site assembly and a lot more planning for this area and working with the community on that idea. The reason we've decided that may be a good fit is that we already have a large park right here, and then we have the new park that we created here. So we're looking at this as one of our sites we've identified for possible urban agriculture. So now I want to kind of go into the recommendations that we have in the plan outside of the focus areas. So I'm beginning with our phase 1 implementation. We've already moved into this implementation phase, and we're creating our green team in the Office of Sustainability, which sits within the Department of Planning, to take on the short-term implementation of the Green Network recommendations. We've created a team of people working specifically on greening efforts throughout the city, and I'm managing this team, and we have 2 other full-time planners, and we'll also have a part-time community outreach organizer and other staff supporting greening efforts. Our charge is to launch the identified pilot projects and create new parks and green spaces and better connect parks and neighborhoods through improved corridors. We have $1 million, which has been allocated to implementation of the Green Network through the city's capital budget, and this same amount has been requested for each funding year moving forward. We'll be managing this funding and using it to leverage other funding opportunities and coordinating with city agencies, partners, and stakeholders to implement projects. Additionally, we're looking for ways to better support community stewardship and greening projects and improve public and private maintenance of new and existing spaces. And we're also playing a convening role in bringing together partners and stakeholders, since we recognize that if this plan is to be fully implemented, it will truly take a network of people and organizations to get the work done. The plan addresses recommendations for improvements to processes and policies to facilitate the implementation of new greening projects. We want to create an interagency working group to develop and implement policy and process changes in the city that can help foster greening projects through improvements to things like water access, permitting, and land agreements. We also want to make sure we're targeting our resources to have the most impact by directing our resources to where we see opportunities for the city to fill funding gaps or provide in-kind contributions through public-private partnerships or interagency partnerships. And we want to make sure that we also are looking to establish a green space workforce development program. We want to begin with a pilot project in the short term that can provide improved maintenance of green spaces and provide jobs to people that need them in Baltimore City. And the key to the success of this program is to make sure that we're not encouraging green gentrification and that neighborhoods where we direct new greening efforts remain affordable for all incomes. Throughout our planning, we've prioritized having a transparent and inclusive process and sought to include voices of residents of varied backgrounds and areas of the city in a variety of stakeholders. The plan includes several recommendations on how to continue this engagement as we move forward into the implementation phase by looking at creative ways to keep people involved and build partnerships. First and foremost, we want to establish processes to ensure all outreach is inclusive and equitable. The Department of Planning has recently added a new Assistant Director for Equity, Engagement, and Communications, and we've been studying our city's capital budget through an equity lens, and our new sustainability plan also takes on this lens. So this has become integral to our work here, and we want to make sure to include this lens in our implementation work for the Green Network. We want to make sure we're hosting public meetings at accessible locations and look at other creative ways to keep people involved. We also have recommendations that focus on land, open space, and natural resource management. In order to enhance and strengthen the Green Network, all of Baltimore's natural resources should be preserved according to established best practices, including water assets, wildlife, and managed open spaces. We also want to coordinate with city agencies to strategically acquire space for new parks and park expansion and to protect natural resources like floodplains and forests. And we want to make sure that new design reflects Baltimore's unique character and make sure that we're collaborating with a variety of local groups. And then finally, we have a recommendation section on funding sources and finance strategies. And in this section, we just want to make sure that we're exploring a variety of funding sources and using our existing capital money to leverage other funding opportunities. And we want to look at how other municipalities have created dedicated funding sources for greening and develop a model that could fit Baltimore's unique characteristics. And so this just outlines our comment period. We started our comment period on March 5th. We're taking comments through the end of April. We had an open house on March 15th. We did a webinar yesterday, and we're doing this webinar today. And then we're also having a sustainability town hall where people will have another opportunity to learn more about the plan. And we'll be conducting other tabling events throughout the comment period. This just gives you an overall kind of outline of our process so far, or the timeline of the process. We started back in the spring of 2016, and now we completed the planning process through the summer of 2017, and we've created the draft document that's out for comment, and we're going to be wrapping up over the summer, once we get comments back, we'll be incorporating those comments and then taking the plan to our Sustainability Commission and our Planning Commission at the end of the summer. And I want to thank you for listening to us. And you can go to the BaltimoreGreenNetwork.com and you can kind of look at more details on all of the projects. Look at we have an interactive map there. And there's a lot of other resources at that. You can see the full plan at that site as well. And we're ready for any questions.
Well, thank you, Amy. Thank you, Kate. That was really, really great. It was a very thorough overview of what you're doing, but I'm sure there's still many, many more questions. At least I do have some questions, and I again want to encourage our participants to ask questions. You can raise your hand, you can type in a question in the question toolbox, or you can send us a chat message. Either way, I want to say this is really, really impressive to see how you try to balance these two dimensions, development of new housing and also green space development, and how you said that explicitly preventing green gentrification, because of course that's usually the immediate thought, you know, once you create a beautiful parkland, park situation, that then this is the first step towards gentrification. And I was impressed how important in your planning and the implementation, probably too then, seems to be the connections with local community groups or community institutions. And you mentioned a Baptist church in one case, and other community anchors, you called them, in other locations. So this is very, very interesting, and I wanted to know whether this was something that you had in mind from the very beginning, or whether that evolved over time.
I think from the outset, we definitely wanted to make sure that we were including people from all different backgrounds and partnering with all different types of organizations. We kind of developed the focus area plans as we kind of got into the plan, and that gave us an opportunity to really do more focused outreach, so that when you're doing a citywide planning process and you have citywide meetings, you're not always reaching into the neighborhoods where you see the most need. And so that gave us an opportunity through the focus area plans to create those partnerships. I don't know if you wanted to add anything more.
No, just to kind of build off of what Kate had said, there's definitely citywide interest in the project, but we're trying to make sure through our process and through making sure to work with communities on identifying what their needs are and what they'd like to see happen in their neighborhoods. The planning for what happens in neighborhoods is based on what we're hearing from the people who live there, rather than asking a citywide audience what they think should happen in a particular neighborhood, when it doesn't necessarily impact people that live in other neighborhoods as far as specifically what happens in a particular neighborhood. And so making sure that we're thinking about that. Mm-hmm. And also relating it, one more thing relating to our sustainability plan, that's a plan that's being developed right now, and that's a much bigger, broader plan, and looks at elements of sustainability, not just kind of greening and water quality and waste and energy elements, but it also includes housing policy as one of the items that we're focused around equity. And so that's another area where we'll be developing recommendations in kind of in parallel with the Green Network plan, related to how we can address concerns about gentrification as this plan evolves and develops.
Great. I do have a question from the audience, and I unmuted Liz Michelle or Michelle. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your last name. And if you can speak, if you're in an environment where you can speak, you can ask your question now directly. Otherwise, I'll be happy to read it out.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So that was phenomenal. Thank you so much for presenting that. It's a very well thought out plan, and the inclusion of all of the community-based, both implementation as well as the participant-driven process is really fascinating. But I'm wondering, once these parks and corridors are fully developed, maintenance was a big concern. And where would that funding for maintenance come from, maybe like 5 years down the line, just to ensure that these once created corridors and parks do not then fall into the same sort of pattern of blight?
Yeah. Did you want to
Sure.
say?
Sure. So with our funding and financing subcommittee, we had the University of Maryland Environmental Finance Center work with us as part of that subcommittee. And so some of the recommendations related to long-term funding is there's an opportunity to do a study with a group that focuses on green space funding, both for implementation and for long-term maintenance. And so some of our next steps will be working with that group to look at various funding mechanisms that other cities have used for making sure that their green spaces have funding both for expanding and creating new spaces, but also for long-term maintenance. And so looking at what some of those options are and what options might work best for the city of Baltimore, and then using those recommendations to kind of figure out our next steps for increasing funding and where we put our energy into making sure that we get more resources.
Yeah, and then some other ideas that we have are really strengthening our partnerships with our community partners, looking at nonprofits, like I was saying before, where we would like to develop some kind of workforce development program that could contribute to the maintenance part, and so maybe partnering with nonprofit organizations that are interested in workforce development, and finding funding streams for that, where the maintenance could be done by a workforce team here at the city. And then also just looking at how we can improve our maintenance as a city as well. So we're working with our partner agencies, Department of Public Works, Housing, the Code Enforcement section of Housing and Community Development, and also Rec and Parks to try and see where we can improve maintenance and also get the funding that we have currently is capital funding, so it doesn't go towards maintenance, which is considered an operating expense. So we want to make sure that we're finding out ways to improve the operating side as well.
Yeah, I guess that's a very common challenge in many public infrastructure projects, that you have different budgets for the initial investment and then the operation of the infrastructure, and that's of course a real challenge, because also it's a lot easier to get the headlines with opening up new infrastructure than to then down the road keep it going. And of course we have all our fingers crossed that this will be a counter example here, so to speak.
Yes.
So this is really great. It's very ambitious also. The city map, the many examples just along the pilot projects, but then beyond that, it's very comprehensive. It's a kind of a massive undertaking. So it's very impressive and could be very, I think, influential and instrumental for other cities that face similar challenges in the US and also beyond, because we've seen that. I'm from Germany. There are cities in Germany struggling with blight and also abandoned or vacant lots. And so this could be a very interesting model project for many cities to follow on. If we do have time for one more question from participants, if they have one. Otherwise, I would have a question that goes a little bit beyond maybe the scope, but it's very related. Baltimore is, of course, it's a city on the sea. So, and you are in a region where there is rainfall, and so the question is, how do you view your green network in the context of rainwater management, water management? You mentioned this in some of the slides, the role of water management as well, but you also mentioned the need for this clean and green. So there is a certain tension between creating bioswales, for example, and we hear a lot of feedback. It doesn't look orderly or clean, and it also might impede view or visibility and encourage maybe activities you don't want. So this is very interesting because there is no simple answer, but how do you deal with that?
Mm-hmm. So our Department of Public Works is the lead for our city's stormwater management planning and meeting the regulations that our EPA has set forth. And so they developed their initial plan a few years ago, and we were partners in that. And so they're already in implementation of the projects that they identified for that kind of first phase of planning. And so we took that into account in the development of our plan, where they have a lot of their work that they're focusing on for this first kind of several years of implementation focuses around stream restoration in a lot of areas, and then also some implementation of green infrastructure along certain corridors. And so we factored that in with our planning. But then in the next few years, they'll be doing their next phase of planning. And so they'll then look back to us as far as opportunities that align with the corridors and nodes that we've identified, and where some of their improvements for stormwater could coincide or coordinate with areas that we have emphasized that we would like to see greening improvements. And so that's one of the ways of kind of coordinating these things.
Mm-hmm. And one of our pilot projects that I mentioned, the Harlem Park Interblock Parks, that's actually going to be one of the first phases of the Department of Public Works will be doing impervious surface removal. A lot of those parks now have concrete, and so they'll be taking that up. So that's one way that we're partnering. And they were included in all of our focus area all of our focus area planning processes. We had DPW representatives there. So we'll be looking at opportunities in the pilot projects to incorporate, if it's not, it may be a clean and green site, but maybe some of the longer term green spaces will have an element of green infrastructure incorporated into the site. So we'll look for those opportunities.
Excellent. A very, very last question coming directly from Michelle Ye from the audience. So if you are ready to speak, you can ask your question now. Okay, if Michelle, if you're not, okay, you don't have a microphone. So her question is, what was so far the biggest opposition or obstacle, and how did you address it? And that's then also closing out the webinar. Thank you.
The biggest, well, I mean, I think the biggest thing that has come up, like I said before, was really the need for maintenance and what we've already talked about. So pretty much every meeting we go to, people are like, well, sounds like a nice idea, but how are you going to maintain these spaces? And when we already have challenging maintaining the spaces that the city has currently to maintain. So I feel like that's one of the biggest pushbacks we get. And then also the other major theme that I talked about, where people want to make sure that they're also seeing redevelopment in these areas and not just green spaces. And then there's just challenges in finding funding as well. We have $1 million, but that's nowhere near enough money to even implement the pilot projects that we've identified. So that's another big challenge, is figuring out where we're going to get additional funding. But I don't feel like we've had huge opposition from anybody, other than we need to make sure we look at those issues.
I think that's very important. And of course, that doesn't generate funding necessarily right away, but at least it gives you a broad foundation for also asking for funding. It's, I think, very, very interesting. And of course, we all know it's challenging to get funding for such non-technical applications, and that are not maybe not as flashy as some data center or any such activities. But I think if we can communicate that this actually increases the value of the city for its residents and for everybody involved, and reduces tensions and reduces challenges and provides opportunities for development at the same time.
I think one other thing I wanted to add about opposition, I mean, one other theme of opposition we've gotten is that people feel like our focus is a lot of the plan is on areas that have experienced disinvestment and distressed areas, because we wanted to have an equity lens in creating this. And so there's some that have the view that you need to be putting the limited money that we have into areas of strength, and we're really trying to push back against that and look at areas, distressed areas. So that's kind of one other kind of theme of opposition that we've had, is that people feel like there's not enough money to do everything that we'd like to do, so we need to put that money towards areas of strength rather than the distressed areas. And we are really pushing back on that idea.
Well, and we certainly all support you in that. So good luck. I mean, this is really exciting because it's going to happen very soon. We're seeing really the beginning. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Kate, for sharing this with us. I hope there'll be a lot of follow-up. And of course, this webinar is recorded, so you can also share the recording later with other audiences. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for asking questions. And thank you, Amy and Kate, for presenting. Have a great rest of your day and be in touch. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.